Good morning, members of the jury. My name's Mark Cedrone, and I represent Patrick Shelow, along with my colleague, Aubrey Cedrone-Emmerich. I want to hearken back to Thursday, when we engaged in this sort of uncomfortable process of picking you as a jury. You remember, we were all sitting on this side of the table. You were all sitting over there. We were looking at you. We were looking at papers. We were consulting it with each other. And then after about 2 hours, you each got plucked from your lives as retired police officers, as school teachers, as opticians, as engineers, or whatever you do. That process, the reason I start with that process, and I remind you of that, is that process was a critical function of this trial. That process was intended by the parties, including the government, to make certain that we pick jurors who would approach this case with the requisite level of seriousness that it requires. Because this is a serious case. It's a serious matter to the United States, and it's certainly a serious matter to Mr. Shelow, who stands here today, as Judge Bailson told you earlier, presumed innocent and remains innocent of the crimes until you, if and only if, you folks deliberate and determine that he's not guilty. So, for example, if based on what Mr. Axelrod told you, what he expects the evidence to show, you're already starting to see, gee, this guy's a bad guy, well then we made a mistake. We picked the wrong juror because you're not dispatching your responsibility. Because as Judge Bailson said, you got to wait. You have to wait until you hear the evidence. You have to wait until you consider one another's opinions. So, what is it you're going to be called to do? Well, you're going to be called to pass judgment on Mr. Shelow, a very important decision. As I said, he's presumed innocent. If you find him guilty, the consequences are tremendous. He will be a presumed felon at that point in time.
Well, Mr. Jones, you ought to chart what you're going to try and show.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you get to that?
Yes, sir. In any event, what is the evidence going to reveal? Well, Mr. Axelrod made a point about this Ecuadorian oil scheme. What the evidence is going to reveal is that Mr. Amick developed a relationship with Mr. Shelow sometime in the 90s. Mr. Amick did business with Mr. Shelow. Mr. Shelow is what might be referred to as a broker. He brokers international transactions. Nearly every transaction in which Mr. Amick or his wife put any money into through Mr. Shelow were transactions and deals which the Amicks brought to Mr. Shelow to investigate and attempt to move forward. This, quote, Ecuadorian oil scam that Mr. Axelrod talks about, Mr. Shelow didn't make it up. He didn't invent it. Mr. Amick brought it to him. Mr. Amick said, I got this great opportunity. What I need you to do is find people to put it together. And that's what Mr. Shelow did. And what did Mr. Shelow do for that? He charged Mr. Amick consulting fees. And that is what constitutes a significant portion of this, quote, investment in this scam Ecuadorian oil deal. Now, in addition to paying, quote, consulting fees to Mr. Shelow for his services on a transaction that Mr. Amick brought to the table, Mr. Shelow and Mr. Amick did business through another company called JAG, J-A-G. JAG was involved to some extent in the Ecuadorian transaction and in other transactions that had economic viability. One of those transactions you're going to hear about concerned a project involving that was labeled the, quote, Boeing project that had significant economic viability through which JAG would have benefited. Who brought the Boeing project to the table? Not Mr. Shelow, but Mr. Amick. Again, it was a transaction that required interrelationships between foreign governments and commercial entrepreneurs. Okay. And finally, Mr. Shelow wasn't having some difficulties at a point in his life. And he did, quote, borrow money from the Amicks. He didn't fraudulently induce Mr. Amick to lend him the money in any way, shape, or form. He borrowed it personally. He personally guaranteed it. You will see documents suggesting that. And yes, He treated this $1.2 million as his own because the evidence is going to reflect that it was his. He sold Mr. Amick shares of JAG for somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000. He charged consulting fees for an amount of about $400,000. And he borrowed $350,000 from the Amicks, which he owes him as we sit here plus interest. Just hasn't been paid. So yes, he did treat all of the money that was given to him by the Amicks as his own because it was. This concept of an investment into an oil deal doesn't even make sense. I'm not even sure what Mr. Amick's going to say about it. And the reason I say that is you're going to see that Mr. Amick tells different stories at different times. The evidence will reveal that. So I can't even predict to you what Mr. Amick's going to say. You're going to just know that on one day he says one thing, on another day he says something else, and today he may say something else. We don't know. That'll all be developed through trial. And that's the reason you can't pass judgment on any witness or certainly on Mr. Shelow until you hear all of the evidence. So with that, that's my foreshadowing of what the evidence will bring to you. That's the purpose of the opening statement. Just please pay attention. Please dispatch your obligation. Please live up to what Mr. Axelrod and I think you are, and that are prudent jurors who are going to pay attention to the evidence and make the decisions regardless of whether you like Mr. Shelow, whether you think he was completely open and honest. You have to look at the indictment. At the end of the day, Judge Bailson's going to give you some instructions. There's going to be an indictment. That indictment talks about a particular deal. That's all this is about. It's about nothing else. And at the end of the case, I'll come back and I'll make an argument. And at that point in time, I'm going to ask you to find Mr. Shelow not guilty, just as he sits here today. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that completes the opening addresses of counsel. We'll now have the government's first witness.
Your Honor, the government calls Ted Amick.
My name is Ted Emery Amick.
Good morning, Mr. Amick.
Good morning.
Or just spell your last name.
A-M-I-C-K.
Now, Mr. Amick, I'm going to be asking you some questions. If you don't hear my question, can you just tell me to repeat it? And if you don't understand it, will you let me know?
Yes, I will.
And also, I know that you have some health problems, so if you need to take a break, please just let the judge know.
I will. Thank you.
Mr. Amick, how old are you?
I am 68.
And where were you born?
I was born in Wimber, Pennsylvania.
And where's Wimber, Pennsylvania?
It's in south central Pennsylvania. It's near Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
And were you raised there?
Yes, I was.
Did you eventually go to college?
Yes, I went to Penn State. I grew up on a farm in Bedford County, and I went to Penn State.
And what did you study at Penn State?
I have a bachelor's degree in animal science, and I have a master's degree in agricultural education.
At any point, did you own a cattle farm?
Yes. My father had a beef cattle herd, and I formed one as well, a purebred herd of polled Hereford cattle.
And when was that?
That was in the 60s when I was a student, in the late 50s and the 60s when I was a student at Penn State.
Now, forgive my naivete about beef farming, but was that for food or was that for dairy?
These were for breeding purposes.
For breeding.
We lived in the area in Bedford County with 3 nationally recognized herds of cattle, and I grew up with those owners, and they helped me to get into the beef cattle business.
And what year did you graduate from Penn State?
I have my bachelor's in 65, and then my master's is in 67.
And what did you do after you graduated in 67?
I went back to my home high school and became a vocational agriculture teacher, and I also taught general science.
And how long were you a teacher?
5 years.
What did you do after you were done? After those 5 years?
I went to Washington, D.C., and became assistant to the National Master of the National Grange.
And if you could explain to the jury, what is the National Grange?
The National Grange is one of the original, I believe it was the original of the national farm organizations. It's consisted of about 500,000 members of rural farmers and families. And it's a rural farm organization now, promotes rural development.
And what did you do after you worked for the National Grange?
After the National Grange, I went to work as a program specialist for the National Future Farmers of America.
And what is the organization, the Future Farmers of America?
Well, all students of vocational agriculture have the opportunity to become a member of the FFA, or the Future Farmers of America. They have various competitions, and I was in charge of the national judging contest. We had about 400 teams that would, state-winning teams that came to Kansas City to the national convention, and I ran that operation. I was also in charge of a major program called Building Our American Communities. That program was sponsored by RJR Nabisco, and it was to get young people involved in local community development activities. We gave local, state, and national recognitions for FFA chapter activities, as well as we honored the top individuals for their achievement in volunteerism.
Now, Mr. Amick, how long did you work for the FFA?
I worked for them for 16 years.
And when was the last time you worked for the FFA?
I resigned in, I believe it was about 1990.
And what happened in 1990? What happened in 1990 that led you to resign?
We had a financial opportunity. My wife was a stockholder in a family corporation, and 2 other cousins bought out the other cousins, and that provided us enough funding for us to go on our own, and we decided to move from Alexandria to the Philadelphia area.
And what year did you move to the Philadelphia area?
It was about 1990.
And when you say that you and your wife got some funding from being bought out of this corporation, how much money did you get?
We actually got a total of $6.6 million, of which about half went to taxes.
And so how much did you end up with after paying for taxes?
About 3.6.
Now, when you were living in the Philadelphia area, did there come a time where you met Patrick Shelow, the defendant?
I was introduced to Patrick Shelow by another person.
And do you know about what year that was?
I think that was about 1994.
And Mr. Amick, I guess I forgot to do this, but do you see Patrick Shelow sitting here today?
Yes, I do.
And for the record, could you just describe what he's wearing?
We will stipulate that Mr. Shelow and Mr. Amick know one another. So.
All right, thank you.
That's fine, thank you. How did you come to meet Patrick Shelow?
This is a strange story. We had a window cleaner that was working in our neighbors across the street. And he came over and knocked on our door and asked us if we wanted to have our home windows washed, and we said yes, that would be fine. And so we hired him to wash our windows, and he started talking about his experiences in working with China, and wanted to know if I had ever been to China, have I traveled, and we got to talking about that, and he said that, and showed us letters and pictures of his work in China, and said that he was able to do some marketing in China, and perhaps I might know some people that could help him with that. And one of those was feed grains, and I introduced him to a feed grain producer to take a look at maybe marketing their grains in China. And in the meantime, he tells me that he knew this person in Florida who he had supposedly done a project with in terms of, I think it was some kind of engine project, and that he introduced as Patrick Shelow. He also said that he was in the petroleum business, and that did I know anyone that could find petroleum that could be made available to Patrick's company to sell it to him. And I told him that I had contacts in Washington. I said, I've never done this before. I didn't know anything about the petroleum business, but I would ask some of my contacts if they knew of anyone.
So, Mr. Rahm, if I can cut you off
yes.
right there. At that point, did you start speaking to Patrick Shelow?
We may have had a phone call or two at the time. It's been a long time ago. But I did introduce him to some folks in Washington, and they talked, and I decided that I should really go meet him face to face.
And when was the first time you met Patrick Shelow face to face?
I would think that would be about 1994.
And where was that meeting?
That meeting was a friend of mine, Gordon Alt, who thought he had contacts as well in the petroleum industry, went with me, and we both met Patrick at a local restaurant. I believe it was in the Boca Raton area for dinner, and Patrick and his wife were at that dinner.
And that's in South Florida?
In South Florida.
Now, from 1994, which you think it is, until 2005, did you invest money in different projects with Patrick Shelow?
Yes, we did.
What was the total amount of money that you invested from 94 to approximately 2005?
It was over to 90.
From 94 to 2005.
From 94 to 2005 would have been in over $2 million.
Now, if you would, could you describe for the jury what some of those projects were?
Yes. One of the initial projects was a program that was called DLOG, which is the word gold spelled backwards. That was a project that one of my contacts had referred to Mr. Shelow, and he asked me if I would be interested in investing in this project, 50% with him. And the outcome of that would be that I think it was 12.5 metric ton of gold, and I can't even tell you who that gold was coming from, was going to be collateralized, and the money was going to be set up to be loaned for investment projects by other oil companies. I guess it was other oil companies.
Mr. Amick, who
yes.
told you about the details of this DLOG project?
Mr. Shelow.
And how much money did you give to Patrick Shelow to invest in this DLOG project?
Over $500,000.
Did you ever see any of that money come back?
No, we never did.
Did you invest in another project called the Telecom Asia stock purchase?
Yes.
And what was that project?
This one goes back quite a ways. Telecom Asia was a telecommunications project that was going to. This was about the time that cell phones were coming out, and it was going to connect them with that, and to help I was told it was to help people in rural areas in China and in South America were going to be the main targeting areas for that marketing.
And when you say you were told, that's what the project was. Who
By
told you that?
Patrick Shelow.
Patrick Shelow told
Yes.
you that. And how much money did you invest in that project?
I don't have the exact figure, but I know it was in the area of about $50,000.
And that money went to Patrick Shelow?
Yes, it did.
What about a project, do you remember a project called Petro Peru?
Yes, I do.
And what was that project?
I was told by Mr. Shelow that his company, Reserve Fuels, had a management agreement with Peru, and that they could market crude oil. This project was to help to market the crude oil, and I was asked to invest in that.
And how much money did you invest in this Petro Peru project?
I don't have the exact figure on that. I passed that to you in the writing.
Would it help for you to refer to your notes?
Yes, it would.
If you could, actually, Agent Lyons, if you could put up Government's Exhibit 65. Just look at that computer screen, Mr. Amick. Why don't we try 65A, that would be the problem.
Oh, okay.
What number?
65A, Your Honor. I don't think it's in the book that I gave you, but I have new exhibits for you, but if you look at the screen, it's on
Okay,
there.
fine. All right, thank you. Josh, hold that screen.
Mr. Amick, does that refresh your recollection
Yes, it does.
as to how much money you invested in?
I wrote this memo.
And does that refresh your recollection as to how much money you invested in Petro Peru?
Yes, to Petro Peru, yes.
And how much money was that?
It was $368,691.
Now,
That was Petro Peru and the other project called the Slop Project.
the SLOP project, was that another project with Patrick Shelow?
Yes, it was.
Now, would you just briefly describe what the SLOP project was for the jury?
The Slop Project was a quantity of crude that was a lower grade crude. And Mr. Shelow told me that there would be a company that would be able to put chemicals and mix it with the crude to actually increase the quality of the crude and to take out the bad particles that were in it. So that project ended having many bills for chemicals and stirring of the product.
And when you say there were many bills, what bills were these?
These would be for storage bills as well as for chemical bills.
But who billed you?
Mr. Shelow did.
Did you ever see bills from any third parties?
No, I did not.
Now, all the projects that you invested in with Patrick Shelow from 95 to 2005, did you ever see a dime back from any of those projects?
No, we never got one penny back on anything.
Now, I want to take you and focus you in on the Ecuadorian oil project.
Yes.
Okay? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Do you recall when, well, let me ask it this way. Did there come a time where you started speaking to Patrick Shelow about the Ecuadorian oil project?
He actually introduced the project to me with a phone call that was in about December of 2005 or January 2006. It was in that area that he called me and wanted to know if we would be interested in investing in that project to open up the indigenous Indian reserves for drilling. And this would be in cooperation with the indigenous Indians of Ecuador.
Now, when he called you to tell you about this project, did you know anyone else who was allegedly involved in this project at the time?
He told me that that there would be other companies involved. His company, St. Joe Trading, Reserve Fuels Limited, which he is president of. There was a company called Sigma Zug. I've never met anyone from Sigma Zug. I've heard about them, but I've never met anyone from them. I don't know them. I understand they are a Saudi-based investment corporation from Mr. Shelow's comments to me.
Mr. Amick, at this time, when Mr. Shelow first introduced this project to you, was there another person named James Bowman involved?
Yes, there was.
And who was James Bowman?
I was working with a contact by the name of Nick Terriez from Boca Raton, and Nick was from Europe. I believe it was Romania or Hungary, one of those countries. And he had lived there. He was introduced to me by one of my contacts in Washington, D.C. So I had introduced Nick to Mr. Shelow, and Nick had known this person, James Bowman, and together they talked to Patrick about their contacts in Ecuador and working with the indigenous Indians in Ecuador. I have never been to Ecuador. I don't know anyone in Ecuador, and all of this came through those gentlemen.
Now, when Patrick Shelow talked to you about the Ecuadorian oil project for the first time in 2005, what happened to that effort to close this deal?
With Ecuador?
With Ecuador, sir.
That project led to a terrific amount of investment on our behalf, and a major loan that he asked us for.
Well, let me take you step by step through that,
Okay.
Mr. Amick. First, if Agent Lyons could put up Exhibit 1A for you. And Mr. Amick, the exhibits are also in the book in front of you.
Okay.
So they're going to be in the book and on the screen. It might be easier with the multi-page exhibits to look at the book.
Okay.
So if you flip to 1A.
1A. Yes.
Have you seen Exhibit 1A before?
Yes, I have.
And if you could just briefly describe what it is.
This was a commission and fee agreement that the AMIC Group, my company, which is a Pennsylvania Subchapter S corporation, had with Patrick Shelow's company, Reserve Fuels Limited.
Let me just cut you off right there. At this point, Your Honor, the government would move for the admission of 1A.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, admit it.
May
You
you
want to show it
publish
to
that
the jury? Can the jury see it? No?
Try to blow it. What part do you want?
Just blow up the whole document, just if you can select the whole document.
Or the jurors have it? Okay, good. Okay.
All right, Mr. Amick, if you would describe, just summarize what this document is.
Well, this is a fee agreement. The AMIC Group, through Nick Terriez and James Bowman, our contacts, that referred this to Reserve Fuels and Patrick Shelow, we asked for a fee for making that reference to them. So we had a fee agreement that would pay the AMIC Group on funds that would be derived from that project. Those fees were at 2% of the bonus funds that would be available for as profit to the investors.
Okay, Mr. Amick, you see up at the top, it says Reserve Fuels LTD. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, who is Reserve Fuels? What is Reserve Fuels?
This is a petroleum company, as Patrick Shelow had told me, that he has, I believe, with other individuals, but I don't know who they are, that he is the president of, and the company is basically to, as he said, to market petroleum.
And did he tell you that Reserve Fuels was a successful company?
Yes, he did.
Now, the AMIC group, you see that at the top. What is the AMIC group?
When I started in Philadelphia,